Bismillahirrahmanirrahim and Assalamu alaikum. Good morning to all the keen learners and a very good evening to all the keen learners and a very good morning to our esteemed speaker, Mr. Colin Levy. My name is Mohammad Hammas, Secretary Legal Research and Drafting from Law Students Council, Pakistan. I would like to welcome all of you to today's webinar on emerging legal issues in technology, AI, blockchain, and privacy implications. Continuing the legacy of the Law Students Council, we proudly present this year's webinar series. Our webinar will consist of three discourses. First of all, we will discuss AI, followed by blockchain, and then lastly, privacy implications. Today, with Mr. Collins' unmatched legal expertise in AI, blockchain, and privacy implication, we will delve into the said subjects. Now, I would like to take this opportunity to extend my gratitude on behalf of the Law Students Council to Mr. Colin Levy, who generously made himself available for today's webinar. Please allow me to give a very brief introduction of our esteemed speaker, Mr. Colin. A prominent authority on emerging legal issues in technology and a passionate advocate for adaptation and innovation. As the chief lawyer at Malbek, Mr. Collin spearheads cutting-edge legal strategies at the intersection of technology and law. Recognized as a legal tech Maven, Mr. Collin pioneers innovative solutions, one of which includes developing the legal industry's very first comprehensive guide to best practices for creating effective legal documents in Microsoft Word. His remarkable achievements have led him to be honored as an honoree in the 2022 edition of Fast Case 50. As a sought-after legal tech startup advisor and investor, he supports and guides the next generation of legal tech entrepreneurs as well. With degrees from Suffolk University Law School, Boston College of Law, and Trinity College, Hartford, Mr. Collins' educational background comprehends his enthusiasm for legal tech. Mr. Collins, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really happy to be with you all and talking about some of my favorite issues.
Mr. Colin, thank you very much. Now you may continue. Now, as we have as our topic and subject, emerging legal issues in technology, we will be delving into these subjects. And as I said, we will have three discourses, first of which is AI, artificial intelligence. So our first question is, how is AI currently being utilized in legal industry, and what are some of the most promising use cases for the future?
Sure. So I think, there's a lot of different use cases for artificial intelligence currently in the legal industry. I think probably first and foremost, one of the most prominent use cases is its application in analyzing and looking at data, whether it is on the litigation front, looking at litigation data, i.e. case law, and providing information with respect to arguments that have won against particular judges or winning briefs that have been successful in court. That's one area. So litigation analytics has been a huge, I would say, use case of artificial intelligence because its ability to analyze and look at large amounts of data and then draw out trends and anomalies from that data can be very useful for litigators because it allows them to then be able to figure out how best to present their arguments, how best to structure them without kind of making educated guesses based off of just simply their own individual experience, and instead using data to inform how they go about doing that. So that's one major use case. Another is with respect to contracts and other types of drafting types of activities. Artificial intelligence now, thanks to generative AI tools like ChatGPT and others, are allowing lawyers and other legal people to draft language without having to do it from scratch. They're able to basically create first drafts from basic nothing using AI. And in addition, they're able to use artificial intelligence to help kind of analyze a large set of different, say, contracts and look at those contracts and then be able to draw out potential conclusions, trends, common issues, and or provide suggestions for how to perhaps draft those contracts better, whether on a clause-by-clause basis or whether overall. So artificial intelligence really at this point, I think, is very much showing us the way forward in law, which will be increasingly data-driven and increasingly reliant upon systems and systematic thinking, which traditionally law has not exactly been very much interested in. It's been far more sort of tied back to history and how things have been done based off of just how it's been taught for years and years and years. And artificial intelligence and other technologies are now kind of disrupting that flow, and probably for the better, because in addition, artificial intelligence is allowing, and this is the third use case, is allowing for better access to legal services. And what I mean by that is it's allowing for everyday consumers to access legal resources cheaper by interacting with chatbots or other tools that are AI based and that can provide them with basic information without having to go down the route of contacting a lawyer, interacting with someone who could be very expensive and they may not be able to afford. So it's basically helping to increase access to justice as well.
That's very great, Mr. Colin. Now that you elaborated that in a very brief and better manner, now we will be continuing to the next question, which is, with the increasing adaptation of AI in legal processes, what potential ethical challenges and biases should lawyers and policymakers be aware of, if there is any?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure, Mr. Colin. Mr. Colin, the question is, with the increasing adaptation of AI in legal processes, what potential ethical challenges and biases should lawyers and policymakers be aware of, if there is any?
Sure. So there's quite a few. I think that artificial intelligence in some ways sort of lays out what the problem is with artificial intelligence, which is that it's artificial, meaning it's created by someone else. And whoever is creating it, whether it's an algorithm or whether it's a model or a set of models, they're coming into it with inherent biases they may or may not be aware of. And those then can be embedded into the technology, into the models, and they may not necessarily be aware of that. So that's one area of bias that can impact the usefulness of artificial intelligence tools. In addition, as I said before, given that artificial intelligence is very much reliant on data, in some ways its success or its failure is a part of the data that you feed it. So in other words, if you only feed it a certain amount of data, it's only going off that amount of data and therefore can only provide you with information based off of that data set, which in many ways is always going to be limited just on the sheer fact that there's so much data being created every day and far more data than can ever be inserted into a model at any one time. So there's that issue as well. In addition, right now, currently, at least in the US and in other countries as well, there's very much a lack of any kind of ethical framework around the use of artificial intelligence. There's really no kind of, other than the EU AI law, which will be passed probably shortly, there's no real attempt to provide a way in which sort of you can operate AI within, an ethical boundary. No one's really come up with that. And that is going to be a challenge because artificial intelligence has continued to advance far more rapidly than the law can keep up with it. And in addition, it's growing more and more powerful. And that requires people to be more and more knowledgeable exactly about what its powers are, as well as its limitations. And oftentimes those tasked with trying to kind of rein in and provide a framework around which AI can operate don't have that level of expertise, and they need to rely on others to provide that expertise, and they need to know who to turn to. So that also can be an issue. So overall, I think that artificial intelligence and technology in general is very useful and very powerful, but it remains a little bit of a Wild Wild West type of situation, meaning that there's a real lack of ethical rules around which to operate these tools. And the companies making artificial intelligence, like OpenAI, have themselves said, yeah, there should be ethics, there should be laws around which we can, safely operate these tools, but no one yet has come up with any.
Mr. Colin, that's very great, but very alarming as well. And we hope steps like this will create ethical boundaries in use of AI in technology. Mr. Colin, continuing to the third question, how can AI-powered tools assist lawyers in legal research and contract analysis, ultimately improving the efficiency and accuracy?
So you're asking how AI can help with efficiency and accuracy?
Yes, Mr. Colin, I was asking that what AI-powered tools could be used for that purpose.
Absolutely. So artificial intelligence is very much, a set of tools that provide answers without any kind of inherent human emotion, or these tools never get tired, they never get old, they just simply exist. And so in many ways that allows them to provide answers any time of day or night without risking providing inaccurate information, with the caveat, of course, that that information that's providing is based off of data that you hope is accurate. Because if that data you're providing the model to be used is inaccurate, then of course it's going to provide you with inaccurate data. So I think that certainly AI tools that say, perform tasks like reviewing contracts or clauses are very capable of providing accurate and efficient answers far faster than a human can. And so in that case, these tools are really useful. And like I said, they're never going to get tired. They're never going to get old. They're never going to need a break. So that's very useful. In addition, because these tools are so much faster than humans are at analyzing data, especially, that allows for lawyers and other legal professionals to work more efficiently using these tools and spend less time kind of doing these time-consuming, repetitive tasks of reviewing documents over and over again, when that time perhaps will be better spent on more valuable, higher risk types of work that AI and other technologies are not really suited to do, at least at this time.
Very great. You elaborated that in a very brief and in the best manner possible, Mr. Colin. Mr. Colin, should AI systems be recognized as a legal person? And if yes, on what grounds and what responsibilities and rights should they have?
So I would say that, here in the U.S., the U.S. Supreme Court has said that corporations essentially are to be treated as people under the law. However, when it comes to artificial intelligence, I think we're quite a ways away from recognizing AI tools as people per se. I just think that they are not in any way resembling people. They're not acting like people. They're really not in any way, legally or otherwise, I think, recognizable as individuals. And so in that case, I think we're not ready for that recognition to happen. Will that recognition happen at some point down the line as artificial intelligence continues to advance? More than likely, but we're definitely not near that point right now. And one of the main reasons for that is human beings have something that no other animal on earth has, which is the capability of recognizing themselves and self-awareness, of sort of being aware of who they are, what they're doing, how they're feeling, kind of basically awareness of themselves. And we don't even know how that necessarily happens in our brain. So therefore, it would follow that since we don't know how our own brains work to create consciousness, we can't really replicate it in artificial intelligence either. Until we reach that point, I don't think really recognizing artificial intelligence tools in any way as individuals is feasible or realistic.
Very great, Mr. Colin. Now, as I said, we will be having multiple discourses, and the next question will be the last question of the first discourse, which was of AI. So, Mr. Colin, in your opinion, what are the most significant legal challenges arising from the use of AI technologies?
What are the most common use cases?
No, Mr. Colin, what are the most significant legal issues arising from the use of AI?
Got it. Got it. Apologies. Broke up a minute there. So I think some of the more prominent, challenges. One certainly is understanding. There remains a lot of people who I think don't fully understand uh, artificial intelligence or understand how its current state. A lot of people tend to think of artificial intelligence as robots. Robots are essentially, at least at this point, just mechanical systems that allow for lifting and other types of tasks. Artificial intelligence, really at its most basic level, are data models trained on a lot of data that use data, and so I think that needs to be better understood. In addition, I think that people, especially those within law, need to be more fluent in the language of data, data science, and understanding data and how it works and what it can be and how to basically make it usable for artificial intelligence. So I certainly think that's a challenge as well. And then lastly, I think that an ongoing challenge is just simply to an earlier point, is understanding how to best use artificial intelligence in an ethical, safe, and productive way. And I think that there remains an ongoing, robust debate around exactly what that should look like. And that's useful. I think that kind of discussion is important. And I think it helps kind of shed a light on all the challenges that I've laid out that need to be more fully explored before we're able to make further really significant advances on the AI front.
Very great, Mr. Colin. Hope these types of discussion will prevail for the better. Mr. Colin, as I said, now we will be continuing to the next discourse of this session, which is of blockchain. So, continuing that, what are the key features of blockchain technology that makes it particularly suitable for applications in the legal sector, such as smart contracts and digital notarization?
Sure. So I think it's first important to understand on the blockchain front what blockchain is. It's an interesting space. It's an evolving space, and it was invented by someone or some people. We don't actually know who invented it. We know that the pseudonym is Satoshi Nakamoto, but that we have no idea who that person is, if it's an actual person or a group of people. But the bottom line with blockchain is it really is essentially a bunch of blocks, which are essentially pieces of data all linked together in a chain. And that chain can never be interfered with. In other words, once that chain is created of blocks, it's immutable. It's basically concrete. You cannot change it, cannot be modified, cannot be interfered with. So it's very, very secure. But it's also the type of thing that once it's created, it's created. That's it. Can't do anything. You can add more blocks to it, but that's about it. And blockchain is very, very useful for a variety of different purposes. Primarily, at least right now, it's largely used for financial transactions because of its secure nature and because of the fact that basically makes transactions a lot faster because it doesn't require verification by, say, a bank or other external party. It requires less oversight because essentially it is just a direct connection between two different parties. And as I said before, it's immutable. Therefore, it's very secure, meaning that it can't be tampered with. There's less chance of fraud or cybercrime. So a lot of lawyers currently that work in the financial sector are becoming blockchain experts because blockchain is so heavily used in the financial services industry because of these factors that I just laid out. In addition, blockchain also underlies, and I believe we'll get into this a little bit later as well, smart contracts, which is kind of a misleading term. Smart contracts are I wouldn't really call them smart, and I really wouldn't call them contracts either. They're essentially a transaction that is stored on a blockchain that run when certain conditions are met. So basically, like if this happens, then do this. If that happens, then do that. And it immediately happens, and it's immediately triggered. So essentially, it's a self-executing transaction, which is very helpful and useful and fast. But I think that the smart contract term is a little misleading because it's not what any of us would really think of as being a traditional contract, and it's not smart in any real way either. It just is essentially a computer program running when you simply do something, and then it just runs. So I do think that smart contracts will become more widely applicable, but at this point, I think that they're primarily limited to more financial related transactions because for a couple of reasons. One is financial services have traditionally been very tech forward. In other words, they've been very quick to adapt technology. And secondly, because of the number of transactions that take place in the financial services industry, there's just a very heavy need for faster, more efficient transacting, and blockchain and smart contracts combined allow for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Colin, for shedding light on that. Now we will continue. So, Mr. Colin, in terms of regulatory challenges, what obstacles might the legal industry face in adopting blockchain, and how can they be overcome?
So certainly, I think that when it comes to um, blockchain and smart contracts, as with AI, one of the huge challenges is with simply understanding what it is and how it works. I think it is a bit of a cultural resistance to automation, especially when it comes to automating transactions. A lot of lawyers like to kind of have their physical hands on transactions that they're tasked with. And there's a little bit of I think, a fear of letting technology take it over. So there's that as well. And then lastly, I think, and this is perhaps the largest challenge, is just simply the fact that a lot of lawyers and clients together don't have the level of, I think, technological expertise to be able to make use of blockchain and or smart contracts. And that's a limiting factor in their adoption. And it's also a limiting factor in I think, their effectiveness because less people are using them than perhaps would benefit from using them.
Very great, Mr. Colin. So, Mr. Colin, the decentralized nature of blockchain can make it challenging to assign liability. How can legal frameworks address disputes and frauds in blockchain based transactions?
Sure. So I think that, when it comes to figuring out liability with respect to blockchain and smart contracts, it comes down to figuring out who initiated the transaction, who initiated the blockchain, and who is benefiting from it. So there are ways to figure that out. So there definitely are ways to kind of assign liability. The tricky thing, I think, with liability in blockchain is just the fact that because there's sort of no central bank or entity that kind of, is the middle person in the transaction, that and law, when you look at the way laws are, especially around liability, makes it challenging. So certainly I think that is an issue. But as more and more people get more aware of blockchain and are able to access it, understand it, realize its use cases, the laws will be able to be more easily applied because I don't think it will require a change in law so much as it will require a change of understanding kind of who the liable entity is. And that relies upon understanding kind of how blockchain works and who kind of initiated a transaction on the blockchain. So instead of looking at, say, like a bank, you're looking at, the initiator and the recipient. And that will get tricky, but I think that regulators are getting smarter and smarter about figuring out, A, how blockchain works, B, how people are using it, and C, the types of people that tend to conduct illicit activities using blockchain. And again, this all goes back to how important education is, especially with respect to technology, AI, and the wider kind of ecosystem of different technologies that exist. because we live in a very dynamic world that requires continuing education on these issues, because everything I'm saying right now is how things exist right now, but that could very easily change down the line and more than likely will. So it's going to be increasingly important for all of us, I think, to remain alert and dedicated to educating ourselves on these issues as exist now and as they change and adapt for the future.
Well said, Mr. Colin. Education is very important, and I think education is the key. So, Mr. Colin, now we will be proceeding to the most important discourse of today's session, which is the privacy implications. So, Mr. Colin, as legal tech evolves and collects more data, what steps should law firms and legal tech companies take to ensure compliance with data protection regulations and safeguard client privacy?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, it's really important for law firms and legal departments alike to be aware that data essentially these days is equivalent to gold. It's very valuable. And so the way you approach that is by treating it as if it is gold, meaning that you put in place security to protect it. That means having firewalls. That means having secure portals through which clients can access their data information. That means having secure portals through which communication, such as emails and other documents, are transmitted between parties. That means ensuring that you have a very robust security framework in place, and lastly, being aware of what laws apply to you around data privacy. So, for example, if you're in the EU or deal with the EU, GDPR, of course, is important, but tons of other countries have their own privacy frameworks that are very important to comply with, and they're all around the world. The real challenge, I think, for privacy for law firms and legal departments is around the fact that there's no single privacy framework. It's very much jurisdictional based. So every country or region around the world tends to have their own framework, and you have to somehow find a way to comply with all of them. The good news about that is they largely all follow kind of the same basic principles of granting user access over their data, sort of a right to know who has their data, what it's being used for, right to have their data deleted, and right to control sort of how much data is being used by a certain company. And we see that more and more with a lot of these frameworks that are getting created and passed.
Very great, Mr. Colin. Mr. Colin, you just described how AI and blockchain technology can impact data privacy. But what are the best practices for managing and securing the sensitive legal information?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, I think encryption is increasingly important. Encrypting transactions. That actually is one thing that's very good about blockchain is it's encrypted and it's immutable, so it's very secure. I think in addition, encryption is not just the only thing; it's also ensuring that you have secure solutions in place to transmit data. Email traditionally is what we all use for electronic communication, but it's not always the most secure. So legal departments and law firms alike are engaging other solutions to allow for more secure communication and storage of information. And then I think in addition, we're going to see more and more user access control. In other words, people having not just passwords, but perhaps biometric security on their devices, allowing only that person's fingerprint to allow them access to a device, which I'm actually surprised we haven't seen more of, because it's certainly very secure and your fingerprint is not easily replicated. It can be replicated, but not easily.
And that's very great, Mr. Colin. We will sure be using fingerprints in our daily transactions. Now, Mr. Colin, considering the global nature of legal cases, how can international data privacy laws and cross-border data transfer be navigated to maintain the highest level of privacy and security?
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry, you broke up for a minute there.
Sure, Mr. Colin. So, Mr. Colin, considering the global nature of legal cases, how can international data privacy laws and cross-border data transfer can be navigated to maintain the highest level of privacy and security?
Sure. So I think that we've seen attempts at that made with GDPR and other types of data transfer frameworks, basically requiring that both parties engage in the same procedures to protect their data, and not just protect their data, but protect the transfer of that data. And so I think that between encryption and having a common framework and understanding of protecting information, I think that allows for ensuring the highest level of security. That being said, I certainly think that there's a lot of work to be done still, because we live in a world where, as I said before, data is increasingly valuable and almost like gold. And because of that, there's an increasingly large number of hackers and other types of bad actors, if you will, in the world who are trying to get after that data. And that requires not just being vigilant, but also requiring adapting our laws and privacy frameworks to protect data. And it also, I think, means that there's going to be increased focus on limiting the use of data by companies. And what I mean by that is not just what data how much, what uses they can have for the data, but also what data they can use and what data they can't use and can't collect. And that's going to be, I think, an increasing challenge for companies, because we live in a world where companies every day, especially retail and other companies, make tremendous use of data to help inform themselves about customer behavior. And that in turn informs them how best to market and sell products and create products. And so there needs to be sort of a balance struck, but I think we're struggling to get there right now.
Very clear. You made that very clear, Mr. Colin. Now, continuing, do you think the current privacy laws are sufficient to protect individuals from potential risks posed by emerging technologies? If not, what amendments or additional measures are necessary?
I think there's always more that can be done. But I think the challenge really is the fact that there just are a lot of conflicting priorities, really. There's fact that people want to protect data, but they also want to allow for the transaction of business, and they want to allow for the use of analytics. So I think it's an ongoing kind of battle, and there's a lot of politics involved as well, which doesn't always have the best. Doesn't always create the best environment for discussing these issues and/or passing laws around these issues. And different countries have different cultures as well, and those cultures also inform how they approach protecting their citizens' privacy. And that also will play a role, I think, going forward in terms of how countries interact with one another and/or cooperate with one another with respect to data privacy and protecting the privacy of individuals.
That's very great, Mr. Colin. So, Mr. Colin, when using AI for legal research and data analysis, what privacy measures should be in place to protect client information and maintain the confidentiality?
Sure. So I think the first thing is don't when you're sharing data with AI, you want to make sure that you're not sharing data that is hypersensitive or confidential unless it's your company's proprietary AI model. In other words, you don't want to be providing confidential information to some publicly available model, because you don't really have full transparency into what that model is using any data you give it for. So that's one thing. Secondly, if you are going to be using AI, whether it's a public model or a private model, you want to be upfront with your clients about your use of it, how you're using it, and why you're using it. And importantly, I think we're going to see a push to get more explicit consent from clients to use AI for purposes like data analysis and research. So I certainly think that's important as well. And then lastly, I think that when it comes to protecting and maintaining confidentiality, just awareness of models and doing your research into what models exist, how they use data you give it, and being aware that there's always a greater risk of misuse when you're sharing it with a public AI tool as opposed to using some proprietary AI tool that your company has created or has bought.
Very great, Mr. Colin. So, Mr. Colin, how do you think AI will impact intellectual property laws, especially concerning copyright and patent issues?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing a focus on AI, especially in terms of generative AI and its ability to generate new content, whether it's writing or images. And I think that our IP laws right now are struggling to really reconcile how those laws have been created and traditionally view IP, and how AI is creating what some would call new IP and others would say are replicas of existing IP. And there isn't really a very clear standard to distinguish between the two. So I think that there's going to be a tremendous impact. The extent to which will likely require some rewriting or reimagining of what IP laws should be and should say. But right now it's really in the early days, so it's hard to exactly determine how those laws and changes will play out. But we're certainly seeing the fact that AI is impacting and really kind of testing existing laws when it comes to IP.
And that's very great, Mr. Colin. The whole discussion is revolving around AI. So I would like to take a question from AI now. Is Mr. Colin, AI algorithms often rely on vast amount of data. What are your thoughts on data ownership and usage of rights of concerning AI generated insights?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot that could be said about this issue. I think that in terms of data ownership, I think it's important to recognize that when you share data with a public AI model, in all likelihood, you're not necessarily giving up ownership over that data, but you are sharing it, meaning that that data is now not necessarily fully controlled by you. So certainly that, I think, generates some concerns around usage and ownership rights. I also think that when AI generates content, whether it's imagery or text, it's unclear with respect to who owns that text or that image. Some tools are very upfront about it and say that it belongs to you. Others are less clear or leave it unaddressed. And so certainly I think that ownership and usage rights remain a very big concern with AI and generative AI more specifically, because oftentimes you're asking AI to sort of create something. And so the question becomes, well, you came up with the question to ask it, but you didn't come up with what got created. The AI created it. So does that mean that the AI system has ownership? The company that created the AI tool owns it, or do you own it? And it's not exactly clear what the answer is. Although, as I said before, there are plenty of tools out. There are some tools out there, I should say, that do make it explicit and say that it's more of your, you control it and you own it. But other tools are less clear, and so that definitely remains, I think, an open question. And it also, kind of raises the question of, if you use a tool to help you write something or fulfill something or create something, and then you submit it, do you have full rights to any reward or any recognition that comes as a result of that submission or not? And there isn't a clear answer to that either. So I realize that this is it's a very big question. It's a very tough question to answer because there's no clear way forward and there's no clear kind of answer either. It remains just something that I think AI is certainly making us all think about and really kind of testing the limits of sort of the laws that exist and the concepts we have around these concepts and whether those concepts are still viable and feasible in this age of artificial intelligence.
Mr. Colin, today's session has been so enlightening but alarming as well. So the session was so enlightening that our audience have many insightful questions from you. And if you allow me, I would like to take some questions from the comment section.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Colin. So first question is from Mr. 𝗬𝗪𝗶𝗃𝗏. He's asking that how can you guide us about how IPR works with the data created by AI? Does the company that created the AI holds the right to the data, or the person using the AI has the right to IPR?
Sorry, you froze there.
Apologies, Mr. Colin. Mr. Colin, continue. We were just asking a question from the comment section that Mr. 𝗬𝗪𝗶𝗃𝗏 is asking. Can you guide us about how IPR works with data created by AI? And does the company that created AI holds the right to the data, or the person using the AI has the right to that IPR?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. So, traditionally, IP is intellectual property is something that is created just by you or by someone, and when it gets created, it automatically generates rights that are attached to the creator. So if you consider that in light of AI, at least under U.S. law and U.S. IP rights, artificial intelligence tools that create something then would theoretically be owned by the artificial intelligence tool. But that raises the question of, well, but you're the one asking it to create it, and you're the human, and artificial intelligence is just a tool that's helping you create it. So if you then put that in the context of what I just said, does that mean that you're assigning some kind of personal recognition to this AI solution? And most would say that no, you don't want to do that, but then IP has to recognize that in some way. So it's kind of an open question, and it's also more challenging to answer as well, because I'm just speaking from the American's perspective. Plenty of other countries have different approaches to intellectual property rights. And in general, most of them tend to follow, I think, a similar path, in that the creator, when that person creates something, generates rights for themselves to whatever that thing that got created. But that doesn't kind of really jive with what I said earlier with respect to artificial intelligence. So it's kind of a tough question to answer, because there isn't a clear answer right now.
And that's very clear, Mr. Colin. Now, if you allow me, I would take another question from the comment section. Thank you, Mr. Colin. So, Mr. Colin, what are the implications regarding the intellectual property rights in case of AI-generated content, considering the way it's generate content? Furthermore, what would be the correct way to tackle an issue like such, especially when there's ambiguity surrounding the ideas of AI legal personage?
I think the bottom line really is to keep in mind that if you are having artificial intelligence help you create something, to acknowledge that it helped you create that. And so in that way, you're saying, yes, this is something that I helped create, but I had the assistance of artificial intelligence. So I think kind of sharing the credit, I think, is the best way forward right now, in light of the ambiguity and the lack of clarity around IP rights as they pertain to artificial intelligence generated content. That being said, I think we'll sooner rather than later see this come to the fore and be tested in court. And that'll be interesting to see how courts approach this issue, because there are a lot of kind of conflicting concerns here, and depending on which way a governing court were to go, it could have a massive impact upon not just AI created content, but on the traditional IP rights doctrine that we know and have been taught in law school.
That's very great, Mr. Colin. Mr. Colin, Mr. Shahid is asking that considering the data cannot be altered nor deleted completely in most blockchain networks, do you think that the data protection laws such as GDPR are compatible with blockchain systems, which require data processors to remove or alter the subject's data upon request?
Yeah, so there's I mean, the question kind of lays out the conflict quite well. Yeah, there's a definite conflict there, and I think the way to approach it is to, when it comes to using blockchain, is ensure that um, you're using blockchain for the right reasons and that you are approaching it keeping in mind that traditional data privacy laws and existing data privacy laws like GDPR may not necessarily fully be able to be reconciled with blockchain, meaning that it's, blockchain poses a challenge, and I think there's going to need to be some adjustments made to different privacy laws like GDPR to account for the fact that blockchain allows for the immutable, transaction, immutable transaction and the immutable exchange of information.
And that's very great, Mr. Colin. Mr. Colin, there's another question from the comment section. Do you think the current privacy laws are sufficient to protect the individual from potential risk? You address that, but are these laws sufficient to protect the states or persons which are not natural persons in the legal perspective from the privacy implications?
Yeah, so I think the bottom line is laws as they exist now are definitely not sufficient to account for the emerging technologies that exist. That being said, they're the best we have at the moment, and the likelihood of there being laws that are adequate or that are appropriately tailored to account for technologies as exist now or in the future is highly unlikely. So that leaves us with the conundrum of having essentially legal regulatory frameworks that are um, a bit haphazard and a bit inadequate to handle the current technology and future ones. And that's, I think, been long the case. So I think the way to approach it is really to recognize that and understand that these technologies present a number of risks, both on the legal front as well as on other fronts, and we need to just be able to understand that, and to be able to understand that and recognize that, I think starts with, again, educating ourselves on technologies and their best use cases and their benefits as well as their costs.
Mr. Colin, that's very great. Uh, Miss Amira has a question that do you think the use of AI can also result in more cyber attacks and it would be more difficult to access those attacks?
Yeah, so I think, cyber attacks are getting more and more sophisticated and they're rising sophistication because of the fact that technology is getting more and more sophisticated. And so I think it's going to continue to be the case where as technology advances, so does the sophistication level of cyber attacks and those that engage in such behaviors. And so I think to counter that means that we have to be able to be ahead of the game, meaning that we have to stay on top of these technologies and be able to defend against them by being ahead of those who seek to use them for bad purposes, meaning we have to understand the best ways to use technologies and then understand that by using them, we have to be prepared for potential bad acts to abuse them or take advantage of them.
That's very great, Mr. Colin. So, this will be the last question of today's session. And the question is from Mr. 𝗬𝗀𝗻 again. So he's asking, sir, can you guide us and give us a legal point of view about NFTs and their dealings, and how are they different from crypto?
Yeah, so created tokens that are essentially equivalent to kind of like, you know, something that can't be replaced. So it's kind of like either a piece of digital art or sort of a immutable trading card or something like that, essentially. And they're different from cryptocurrencies because current cryptocurrency is really something that is um, cryptocurrencies are essentially in some ways kind of like electronic money, only they're not used in that same way, but they operate in the same way in terms of being valued. Their value goes up and down based off of how in demand they are and how used they are, and there's sort of different different crypto exchanges. Whereas NFTs, there's no real governing exchange around NFTs. They just all kind of, each NFT operates in its own little individual universe, and then its value depends on how much someone wants that non-fungible token, i.e. that one trading card. So that's really how they work and how they're different from crypto. The real problem, I think, with NFTs and with crypto is just the fact that they're not regulated really all that much, and their value can be very, very volatile. And that's something that needs to be very well aware of, because there are a lot of people who tend to buy NFT or buy cryptocurrencies and then can either make a lot of money or lose it all over the course of minutes, hours, days, weeks. And that's something that I think is very something that's very tricky, and people need to be very well aware of.
And that's very great, Mr. Colin. Now we are officially closing today's session. So, once again, thank you very much, Mr. Colin, for joining us today. And I am very, very sure that all the keen learners have learned a lot. Dear participants, thank you for joining us today. In today's webinar. This is signing off. See you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks very much.